Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Thrive Talks, Monday night edition of Thrive Talks. It is so good to have all of you tuning in. Tonight, our topic is staying in your feelings, and so we're going to be talking about understanding your emotions and understanding how emotions have an impact on your personal achievement. So as I was uh, preparing for tonight's show, I was just thinking about how growing up, the certain things that we were heard or certain things that was said to us, such as "get out of your feelings," or or for men, "man up," or "quit wearing your sleeves on your shoulders." And I think what happened is over time that made us sometimes feel guilty about what we were feeling, feel guilty about our emotions, or it led to us feeling ashamed and not even talking about what we were feeling. So over time, society just conditioned us to suppress our emotions and our feelings, and we quit engaging, we stopped talking, and that has an impact on how we evolve and how we grow professionally, personally. Just it affects every area of our lives. So tonight we have with us our guest, Dr. Marilyn Simmons, a colleague, a friend of mine. I'm so glad, Dr. Simmons, that you agreed to join us tonight on Thrive Talks. Um, and share your expertise with us on this topic. So, if you will, would you introduce yourself to our listening audience?
Well, good evening, everyone, and good evening, Dr. Thriving, as I affectionately call you, my brother. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share this time and this platform with you. Brief background: I was not supposed to amount to much by society's standards. I was born a child of poverty in the inner cities of Nassau in the Bahamas. At a very young age, my country became independent. And I remember standing there, and the founding father said to us, "We are not a rich country. We don't have much to offer you, but the only thing that we can offer you is public education, because education will be your way out of poverty." I drank the Kool-Aid, and as such, I took advantage of the one gift that my country could give me. I continued to be and continue to be a lifelong scholar. I am currently retired professionally from my career as an educator of 27 years in the United States. Prior to that, my first career, I was a pharmaceutical chemist in the Bahamas. I was one of 5 female chemists who helped to develop drugs such as Aleve. This was in a time when it was frowned upon for women to partake in science. As such, I made it my life's work not only to lift up women in science, but to empower people everywhere. And this is why I chose to do a quantitative self-designed PhD, where I looked at the effects of emotions on achievement. I felt that if the gift that my country gave to me was education, then I can use that education to help empower others. In my personal life, when not finding empowerment for others, I am a long distance runner. As such, I have run over 196 marathons, a 100 miler, 450 milers, and 950 Ks. Additionally, I've run every day since January 1st, 2012. And humbly, that is how I present myself to you.
Wow. So thank you, Dr. Simmons. Very active in every area of your life. So let's get started tonight. So in your research and the work that you've done, what is the impact of emotions on personal achievement?
So, my research was a self designed quantitative study where I looked at the effects of emotions on achievement. I embarked upon this self designed study, and I had to fight tooth and nail for a university to allow me to even do the study. And I decided upon this study because in working in US schools, I found that African American students were not doing well in science. There is a large gap in science achievement between blacks and whites in America. To this day, it's around 39%. And so that was the impetus for my work. I then took that research and spread it to the broader population. So the impacts of emotions on personal achievement simply comes down to knowing who and how you are. I joined a group of researchers predominantly in Germany and England who identified 8 discrete achievement emotions. That research says that if we can control our values, we would be able to value what we control. I took that research and used it to identify the strong and weak, or strong and not so strong emotions that were impacting our children. And so I identified these 8 discrete achievement emotions. So, for example, if one's positive dominant emotion is pride and one's positive negative emotion is shame, these two have what you call a negative impact on each other, what they call in statistics a negative correlation, which means if pride increases, shame will decrease and vice versa. So if someone knows the impact that their emotions will have on their achievement, they will then be able to use the knowledge of their emotions to be able to more perfectly balance their path towards reaching their goals.
So what you're saying is the more in tune we are with our emotions
Yes.
and understanding the emotion, it just empowers us to be able to regulate and manage on this journey toward our personal achievement.
Absolutely. Because if we don't know the emotions that define us, it's like swimming upstream blind, because we know we're feeling stuff, but we cannot understand fully why we're feeling things. And we see that in every aspect of society where people are struggling with things and they're identifying, like most people say, oh, it's anxiety, it's depression. First of all, depression is not an emotion. Depression is a syndrome which involves a combination of emotions and experiences. So, identifying the emotions that underlie one's depression, one will be better able to achieve their goals by working on the depression and moving forward positively.
Okay, so can you and you so leading into what you just said, explaining the relationship between emotional intelligence and success.
Yes. So emotional intelligence is basically our ability to recognize, manage, and understand our own emotions. Once we can do this, then we will be able to do the same for others, which is why it ties in with my research and what I just stated. Because if we don't name them, we won't be able to adequately recognize them in a definite sense and then be able to work on them. Case in point, the positive emotion of joy means that we require a lot of external validation. We need a lot of attention. If we know that joy is our positive dominant emotion, then we will work on trying to do more self validation to contain the joy rather than relying on external validation. So, high emotional intelligence equals high success rates in all endeavors of our lives.
So that would be in our professional lives, in our personal lives, in our relationships, in our marriages, in our friendships.
Absolutely. Case in point, if there is a couple and they constantly fight about little things, they know that they love each other, but you probably heard the saying that I love you, but there are things I don't like about you, because these things are usually encompassed in the dominant positive and negative emotions. So I work with couples in couples coaching where we start out by assessing and identifying these emotions. Then if the man comes home from work and he wipes his hand on the good towels, the woman would not be likely to cause a fuss because she understands that his dominant positive emotion is hope. He is just hoping that this thing that's a cloth will dry his hands, whereas her dominant positive emotion is joy, and it's the external validation that she gets from looking at the good towels hanging on the rack, to use an example.
Right. So, so even those small things with couples, it's important to understand those positive and negative emotions, and how it's
Absolutely.
impacting the relationship and how they're interacting with one another. So, how
Absolutely.
does the positive and negative emotions uh, differently affect one's ability to reach their goals?
I touched on this earlier, but to address it definitively, positive emotion. So, in the active research, the scaffold on which my research is built or was built, but there are 8 discrete achievement emotions that have been identified. There are 3 positive emotions: joy, hope, and pride. There are 5 negative emotions: anger, anxiety, hopelessness, boredom, and shame. In my research, I identified a correlation pattern between these. Correlation means how one thing impacts the other. So it is seen that the 3 positive emotions positively correlate each other, and we would expect that. So what does that mean? That means that if one person has joy and the other person has hope, together they can both lift each other up with a positive correlation, because as joy increases, hope would increase, and vice versa. With the negative emotions, the 5 negative emotions also positively impact each other. So, what does that mean? If shame increases, then anxiety could increase. If an anxiety increases, anger would increase. So, how can we then look at the positive and negative emotions as they relate to reaching our goal? If my positive dominant emotion is hope, and my positive negative emotion, and my dominant negative emotion is anxiety, anxiety and hope are negatively correlated, but it is a great way to enhance reaching your goals. Why? Because if hope increases, since it is negatively correlated with anxiety, as hope goes up, what's going to happen to anxiety? It's going to go down. And so, this is why knowing your positive
Go
and
down.
negative emotions will help you to reach your goals.
Right. Okay. So when we talk about the positive and negative emotions, so when we now moving into when we learn how to manage or regulate our emotions, can can managing emotions be learned? And if so, what are some effective strategies for
That's a
learning to manage
very
our emotions?
That's a very good question, Dr. Thriving. It comes down to the old statement, nature versus nurture. And so, from that point of view, I talk about this in my first book, the fact that we are all born emotionally equal. What happens then is that based on how we are nurtured, is how we learn to adapt and deal with those emotions. Case in point, we have to be careful to not negatively to not reinforce negative behavior. Case in point, if a baby drops a toy and you pick up that toy and you give it to the baby and you're laughing and you say, don't drop this toy again, what you are doing inadvertently is that you are positively reinforcing negative behavior. If that child grows up with that, we call that also a sense of entitlement eventually. So, how can we unlearn negative behavior and turn it into positive behavior? It comes down to nothing more than a impetus for change. What's in it for me? Some of the background foundation of my work is based in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which talks about fulfilling lower level needs in order to self actualize. It's also in Freud's motivational theory, which basically says, why should I do this? What's in it for me? And so, in order for us to even consider changing our emotional disposition, we have to have something positive in it for us. Unfortunately, this does not have to be a positive moral situation either. This is why we have people who gravitate towards crime, because they actually find some positive emotional reinforcement in that, which is why it aligns with a little bit of the work that you're doing in prisons and in recidivism, because or reducing the recidivism rates, in order for us not to make it palatable for offenders or for people who were incarcerated to repeat these incidences and return to prison, we have to look at the antecedents to the behavior. What is it that is causing the behavior, and how can we tweak that emotional foundation to turn it around?
Right. Yeah. So sometimes when I'm working with individuals that are incarcerated or that are in reentry programs, or individuals that may have an active addiction, so I will ask the question, what does this do for you?
Right.
I will ask that question. What does this do for you? What benefit are you getting from this? And you would be surprised by some of the answers that I get sometimes. And so when we talk about learning how to manage the emotions, so that's just really being in tune with our emotions, understanding what we feel in the moment. So I can recall some years ago, I was feeling stuck. I was feeling stuck. I was feeling lost. Had no sense of direction. But I can remember experiencing very intense emotions, and a lot of times those emotions were overwhelming for me. And so, because they were overwhelming for me, I became hopeless, right? And then, so I did not have that self awareness. So, how does self awareness of one's emotional state influence our decision making?
The scenario you gave is a perfect way to talk about the other part of my research. So, from my research, I developed an instrument that measures 96 possible emotional dispositions. These emotional dispositions, these 96, are based on the product of the 8 discrete emotions that I identified earlier. Then there are 4 neurological domains from which we function predominantly. That's, are we cognitive, as in thinkers? Are we affective, as in all in our feelings? Are we naturally driven or motivated, or do we need a physical or physiological manifestation, something tangible to get us to move forward? And what you described with your feeling of hopelessness was actually not just from the negative emotion of hopelessness, but it's also from the neurological functionings, as in saying, you're probably thinking enthusiastically and saying, what am I doing with my life? Where should I go from here? Then a part of you was probably suppressing your feelings because, oh, I'm a man. I shouldn't be feeling things, because, again, this is an indoctrination that society has given, in particular to Black males. And so that struggle will lead you to say, what are some of the ways that I can change this? What are some of the ways that I can get around this? And so the self-awareness, I think that's how the self-awareness of this state influence your decision-making. It comes down to good old Glasser. Most people may not have heard of Glasser. They can Google it. Glasser came up with choice theory. And basically what choice theory says is we're responsible for our actions. Unfortunately, if you're feeling hopeless and all forlorn and somebody says, hey, you're responsible for it, get up and do something better, it's not going to work. But this is what we do in our schools every day. This is what we do with our children. This is what we do on the job. So how can we turn that around? Well, first of all, we've got to think about what choices did you make when you were in that state of hopelessness. There are only five reasons for us to make choices. Either it's for survival, it's for belonging, it's for power of some kind, it's for freedom, or it's for fun. And so once you decide to make a choice based on one of those things, if it gets you down what we call the wrong path, then now you need a tool, a scaffold. And that comes down to seeking, in most cases, if it's such a state of despair and hopelessness, there's no other resource but to seek therapy or coaching or talk with someone. People can start by talking to their religious leaders, to someone that they trust, to a mentor. So in some way, they can then have a beginning of a plan to move forward. From the point of view of my research, I talk about it from the point of view of knowing your emotional profile. Because as I described earlier, if you know that dominant positive emotion, if you know that dominant negative emotion, even if you're at the state where someone like me, a coach, would refer you to a therapist, at least you have a blueprint, which you can take and say, I'm feeling hopeless, but look, my dominant negative emotion isn't hope. It's actually anger. Can you help me with this? So it all comes down to understanding why you made the choices and then starting a path towards seeking help. And that last part is very difficult for most people to
Yeah. So you said some individuals make choices based on the sense of wanting to belong,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So if I'm not in tune with my emotions, if I don't understand my emotions, and that sense of wanting to belong, could that keep me in a relationship that may be toxic for me, or a relationship that I may not be getting my needs met in that relationship?
Absolutely. And what you just described is actually the case for more than 60% of the world's population. First of all, those of us that were raised with deep cultural attachments, we are told that we shouldn't want anything that is just us alone. We should want a relationship even if we are suffering. And so we get so addicted to belonging that we lose sight of our own need for internal peace. And this is why, for instance, during the pandemic, we had so many couples who were forced to be home alone, and they realized that they didn't even know each other because they were just in this relationship to belong, because some vast aspect of society says you should belong. Then others of us, like myself, who choose to live what we call the alone life, we're actually ridiculed. Now, let me make this differentiation. There is a difference between being alone and being lonely. The Surgeon General actually just identified loneliness as the third leading cause of depression and death in the United States. So let me caution at this point, if
Hmm.
you are a loner who does not feel lonely, that means you have your sense of belonging. If you are staying in a relationship just to belong, you can still be severely lonely. And that only enhances the detriment of yourself emotionally.
Right. I can tell you, Dr. Simmons, that when the onset of COVID,
Yeah.
in the midst of COVID, at Thrive, we started getting all of these telephone calls for couples counseling, for marriage
Mm.
counseling, and we were trying to figure out what is going on. Why are we getting all of these calls all of a sudden for marriage counseling, for couples counseling? And so it dawned on us that everyone's at home now.
Mhm.
in those states that shut down, we were
Yes.
working from home, and so now you had couples that they're in the home 24/7 together,
Yes.
and they realize maybe we don't like each other
Yes.
like we thought we did, right? And
Yes.
so that was one of the things we started to experience during COVID. There was an increase in calls for marriage counseling. So, no, shifting this. So we were just talking about couples, right? So for those that are listening that may be in the workplace, in professional settings, and there may seem to be a lot of attention in the workplace, right?
Yes.
So, in what ways do emotions play a role in a team or a group setting regarding achievement?
It comes down to simply understanding the definition of emotional intelligence, which means that you know yourself well enough that you can take time to empathize and get to know someone else. But in my work, I have been commissioned by various aspects of society, medical groups, academic environments, as well as families, to get an understanding of how to make the team, the group, work more cohesively. And for me, again, at the risk of sounding biased, it comes down to having an emotional profile for each member of the group, as well as a group profile. As an educator, I recently retired after 27 years of public education. And as an educator, every year I did an emotional profile for every class period. And I did a class average. And I had my achievement emotions board with the color coded barcodes. And each period understood, because they were trained during the first week of school, not only to understand their profiles, but to understand the profiles of the class as a whole. And so it was amazing to hear students look and say, first period, and say, oh, first period's dominant positive emotion is hope, but their dominant negative emotion is boredom. Oh, Dr. Simmons, you got to work hard with them, because they understood that in a group, if you've got members who are bored, it doesn't mean that they're just drifting off somewhere. Boredom actually means that there is a mental detachment from what's happening. And so, as a team, you would then have to make sure that you are, quote, differentiating or finding ways to include everybody in the activity. I have seen this also in the medical field, where I had to assess a whole group of individuals working across the Midwest in various groups for this medical conglomerate. And come to find out, they had situations where some of their members were complaining and saying, I don't want to work in this department. I don't want to work in the other department. And lo and behold, they, of course, weren't getting along with team members. And when they commissioned me to do the overall group profiles, it was shown clearly that the members who were asking to be moved to other areas, their emotional profiles based on their self-assessment actually justified that they would be more productive in other areas.
Yeah, yeah. I think from the when I first met you and was introduced to your work, I was highly impressed with your research and what you do, because I think that society has not done a good job with helping us to understand emotions and how emotions work, and how to effectively regulate and manage emotions, especially when it comes to Black males. Society has conditioned us to suppress and hold things in, because again, we were taught that we had to be strong at all times. We couldn't show any type of weakness. We were told things like, man up, those types of things. And so what Black males started doing is we started to suppress and hold things in. And then with everything that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, going
Yes.
into the work environments, and then we were facing the aggressions in the work environment. We're dealing with a systematic oppression and systematic racism. and all of these things that just as a black man that we have to deal with, uh, uh, we just suppress and we hold everything in. And so I just don't think society has done a good job with helping us to understand that it's okay to be to not be okay. It is okay to feel what we're feeling, right? But being able to learn how to regulate and manage so that we can be present in the moment. And so one of the things that we see happening in relationships is because black males, we have suppressed our feelings and our emotions. We grow up and we get in relationships. We don't know how to be emotionally present in those relationships. We don't know how to be emotionally available to our spouses and to our mates because society has conditioned us to suppress. So then we have you know, the female, what's going on? Why can't you talk? Why can't you show up? Why? Well, we haven't been taught.
Exactly.
That's and so I see that a lot in relationships and when I'm doing couples counseling. And so because of this, that society has not done a good job with helping us to understand emotions. What are some of the techniques or tools that individuals can use to better understand their emotions?
It's a very good segue and a very good question. Just to touch briefly on what you said about Black males. In all of the years that I've been assessing young Black males in high schools across the Southeast, well, up and down the Southeast, in the inner cities of Miami, in the cities of Atlanta, Savannah, in sub-rural areas such as Albany, Georgia, and Warner Robins, I have found a very small percentage of African American high school males who assess as angry. I find that they mostly assess as hopeless or they assess as bored because they don't feel a connection to what's happening, which could lead to the hopelessness. Additionally, between thinking and feeling, a lot of African American males actually score more on the affective or more in tune with their feelings than African American women did compared to white or European Americans. I found that their males are usually more about shame and about motivation. So it's interesting, and I know we may or may not touch on the cultural aspect of it, but I superseded that just slightly because of what you mentioned. And so from that point of view, Black males actually get this bad rap about being angry. Most Black males that have come to me for an assessment because they have anger management, 8 times out of 10, their dominant positive emotion is not. Dominant negative emotion is not anger. So, what are some techniques or tools that individuals can use
Right.
to understand this? Self reflection, self exploration, but above all, self acceptance. Now, these might sound simple, but they can be difficult because, as you said earlier, we're not taught to do these things. And above all, these are all what we call internalization mechanisms. Now, some folks might say, oh, that should be easy to do because all you do is you just sit and think. It's not that easy for you to sit and think, where, as you described, you are externally thinking about how you were labeled and who said this, and you've got to pay a bill and what they did to you at work, et cetera, et cetera. So, what are some techniques that we can use? Find time to sit with yourself. Even if you don't do meditation in the formal sense, just sit and let your mind go. And then, if you will, jot it down. Or now it's easy, just use the voice recorder on your phone and talk to yourself in the phone. What's on your mind? Because when you play that back to yourself, or if you seek therapy, you can play that back to your therapist and you get a clear understanding of what you were thinking. Additionally, Make time for yourself. We have this notion that, oh, I'm looking for my other half. And really, that's how we go about these relationships. It's like a half and a half. Well, if you are whole and the other person is whole, you wouldn't have to look for your half, and you won't have a hard time finding time for yourself. Lastly, mindfulness. Although I must caution, Dr. Thriving, mindfulness has just been written about in the Journal of Neuroscience a few months back. And it said that we have a situation now in America where mindfulness is leading to large amounts of depression because people are practicing mindfulness without direction. Therefore, it is important for you to at least try the first two steps. Get to know what's happening in your mind, make time for yourself, and then you will have a clearer pathway for mindfulness.
Okay. Right. So for the parent, the mom, the dad that may be tuning in and they are just feeling overwhelmed by life, just trying to make it, trying to make ends meet, trying to, pay bills, take care of the children, struggling with affording just the basic necessities of life. Uh, how does stress influence emotional responses and in turn the ability to achieve?
Some people think about stress as something external. The triggers are external, but the stress is being generated from within ourselves. They are coming from our common, everyday, little known organ systems, hormonal systems. Most of our listeners have heard about adrenaline. How many of them have heard about the thyroid hormone? Mm-hmm. Well, a few, because they'll say, oh, I was lethargic, and so my doctor said it was my thyroid, or I have to take iodine. Well, the thing is, stress influences our emotional responses and our ability to achieve, because everything that we do is under the control of one master gland in our body, the pituitary gland. It determines how we breathe, how we sleep, how we eat, how we interact. And so when we are faced with the stresses of life, this is when it's important to practice that going within. A lot of people don't go within because it's like that old saying, most people don't want to spend any time inside their mind because it's a dangerous neighborhood. But if we get into the habit of going within and staring down the ugliness that we say is leading to our stress, we will then be able to better recognize and respond to what we are feeling. Instead, when we get excited, what we do is we react. And so reaction then is going to have a ripple effect. And when we get this ripple effect, it's definitely going to impede our ability. If it's at work, we could get sent home for a day or two. We can lose our job. If it's with our children, we can have the authorities in place who may take our children away. So it comes down to understanding the triggers for the stress, and then understanding where the stress is coming from within ourselves. And this does not mean that you have to have a lengthy amount of education to be able to figure this out. All you have to do is understand that if you feel your blood pressure rising, that's a sign that something is taking you away from your center. Stop. Do the proverbial count to 10 and then say, where is this coming from? And that's the simplest way to help alleviate stress before it influences how much we achieve or how much we do not achieve.
Right. Yeah. So, Dr. Simmons, I want to take the time to address one of the comments in the comment section, because I hear this a lot, and it's dealing with Black women, and I hear it a lot in some of my therapy sessions. So the comment says, Angie says, and for Black women, especially for those who feel responsible in being the glue that holds our families together, doing everything and thinking of everyone else first. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard in therapy sessions from Black women that will say, Mr. Antoine, I am tired. I am tired. They they are doing everything to keep the family together.
This
And what
comes
they're
down.
wanting is they're wanting the men to step up and lead, right? To lead and provide that security and that protection and all those things, right? But I cannot tell you how many times where I've heard Black women say, Mr. Antoine, I am tired.
To respond to Angie in particular, and to respond to what you've experienced in therapy and what I've experienced in coaching holistically, it is the concept of the dog chasing its tail, if you will. Why? Because Black women are raised in a culture that says we're supposed to be in charge of things. And then when they get a husband, the husband is raised to say, happy to believe, happy wife, happy life. So what's happening in both of these instances? Both people are taking on a persona that is not true to who and how they are. Therefore, in both people taking on something as from the point of view of the women that was culturally put on them, and from the point of view of the men that was culturally put on them, we are not living in our true identities. Now, here's the other thing that I've experienced, and you may have as well. If a man were to self own and say, hey, I would rather this be a true partnership, a partnership in every way. 9 times out of 10, my clients would always say, oh, he wanted me to pay half the bills. So then the Black woman in particular, when they hear the word partnership and equality, they're thinking more about finances than anything else. When the man hears he has to be the man, he is thinking finances and everything else. So really what Angie is experiencing, and what a lot of Black women are experiencing, is purely from the point of view that to thine own self, we must be true, even if it means showing our vulnerability. And that's another topic, perhaps for another day, because we have both been, because males and females have been conditioned not to show vulnerability. You cannot have truth if you are not honest with yourself and others. It can be walking down every aisle you choose to walk down, and every I do, and every for this and for that. But if you're standing there and you're not standing in your truth, it's always going to be that battle where the woman feels like they have to do everything, because really they don't. Case in point, what if the man says, let me go to the grocery store? The woman is, oh, well, I'm not sure if you're going to get what I need, and maybe not. Why not just let him do it? What if the woman says, let me mow the grass today? Well, I don't know if you can handle the lawn. Why not just let them do it? Because then you're growing towards that equality that says, hey, I trust you enough, and I'm honest enough with myself to let you share my role. And so then we can empathize with each other because we'll know what our struggles are. But again, it comes down to that control. And like we said with choice theory, why are you making the choices? Is it power? Is it survival? Or what is it?
Yeah. So I would tell you, Donna can give me a list and I go to the store and I would still get something wrong. So
but therein lies the rub.
Friday,
Is it wrong, or is it so wrong that it can never be fixed? Because then as women,
right,
that's what we have to learn. Like, do we have to say something about it?
right.
We don't really
Yeah.
have to.
Right. Yeah. So on Friday on my Thrive Talk, my topic was showing yourself grace. Right.
Yes.
So when we make mistakes, we err. Sometimes we beat ourselves up. We become so critical and so down on ourselves that it's hard for us to move forward. So when we talk about being empathetic toward ourselves. So, what role does empathy play in understanding and manage not only our emotions, but also those of others around us?
That question is perfectly aligned with a quote that I said a few minutes ago: to thine own self be true. Because if you understand who and how you are, if you own you, then you will feel confident enough to present you to someone else. The problem is that we are afraid of that vulnerability. We are afraid not to be accepted. So many times we put on a persona that's outside of us. We show what we think someone wants to see. However, if we truly understand who and how we are and accept who and how we are, that is the foundation of understanding emotions. The word emotion comes from the Latin word emovere, and emovere doesn't mean to feel. It means to move out, to move through. So if in relationships we allow others to move out of one space of well-being, of being into another, to move through things, then that would be the best role that empathy can play in understanding our emotions and the emotions of others. But what we do is like putting our foot on a garden hose. We stop the flow because ain't nobody want to hear that. Ain't nobody got time for that. You need to man up. Oh, you need to stop all of that. And so we are not allowing emotions to do what its root word says, which is move through a situation into a better situation.
Right. So, Dr. Simmons, can you share a story of someone who may have improved their emotional intelligence and then saw a reflection in their achievements?
Yes, absolutely. In my professional career, I've seen this over and over again with students. The students that I worked with, they were from parts of society similar to what I grew up with, except I didn't grow up in a city in public housing. But if I were a child in America, I would be in the same circumstance. And so to see these students come in the first day of school, especially for science, and they're dragging, and they already have every self-defeating thought that you can think of. And then I say, the first thing we're going to do is a test. And they, oh no. I said, but it's a test for me to understand you, but more important for you to understand you. Once those students do their self-assessment, and then the next day they get their results, and especially again for the African American males, they say, oh, I know my negative emotion is going to be anger. And when they get it back and they realize it's not, oh, all my life people were telling me that I was angry. And so now you can see the hope rising up in them, even if hope isn't their positive emotion. So from there, they're armed with that dominant emotion, that negative emotion, that neurological function, and they use that. They're trained by me to use that throughout the school year. So case in point, let's say Johnny one day gets mad and throws his book off the desk. The average teacher would write Johnny up, put him out. I would call Johnny over. Hey, Johnny, I know you're upset. We're going to talk about it. But before we talk about it, remember, your dominant positive emotion is hope. Your dominant negative emotion might be anger, but you're also a thinker. So what can we do to help make this better? So in that way, students were allowed to stay in class. And also, we don't start that school to prison pipeline with every time an African American child gets into some altercation, you write them up to the point that if they get so many write-ups, then that's special education. And that's a whole nother conversation for another day. Additionally, in my private practice, I've had several instances. There was a young lady who everybody in her family was like, it's time for you to get married. You had this age, blah, 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 blah. And she said she knew within her gut that it wasn't time for her to get married because she didn't feel it. And so she took the assessment. We had a few coaching sessions, and she was empowered enough to follow her gut and say, hey, I need to wait. Also, as far as the group settings were concerned, there was a company that hired me to assess all of the people within their area because they had low customer satisfaction surveys. So they wanted to look to see if emotions could be used to predict those achievement outcomes in their workplace. Additionally, with couples, like I mentioned earlier, with the couple in particular, one of the biggest things was he always came home using the good towels. So those are simple everyday areas where I've seen copious amounts of success stories from people understanding how their emotions impact their overall achievement.
Right. Yep. So I have often said in some circles, some of my colleagues don't like when I talk about this, but I often have said that people of color, we tend to get the most aggressive diagnoses, particularly young Black boys in school. They get the most aggressive diagnoses, right? So, what impact do cultural differences have on emotional expression and the understanding of achievement?
This question is so near and dear to me because in my entire educational career, my number one fight every day was being that wall between one more Black or brown male being labeled special education. Because if we don't understand the cultural dynamics in expressing emotions, case in point, many African American males were made to believe from an early age that they were angry because of how they express, when in turn it's something else like hopelessness, etc. If people are not trained to recognize how emotions are manifested across cultural lines, then they are not qualified to label anyone in a manner that's going to impede their overall achievement. Because in public schools in particular, a lot of our listeners might have heard about the school to prison pipeline. Some of them might be in denial about it. Well, I've worked for 27 years in inner city schools, and it was my number one purpose to make sure that I wasn't one of the teachers who was willing to sign over a child to special education just because this child didn't have a pen, or just because this child wants to walk around while he's doing his work. Well, hey, folks, that's called being a tactile kinesthetic learner. And people of African descent are usually tactile kinesthetic learners. They're not visual learners who are going to sit and stare. They're not auditory learners who are going to receive information with sound, and so their face looks blank. And so when we have people from other cultures who are working across cultures, they need to make sure that they understand cultural manifestations of emotions so that they do not misinterpret, misrepresent, misdiagnose, and by default, cause students to be improperly labeled. Because this is definitely a way in which a cultural difference can impede someone's achievement based on the emotions that they manifest.
Yeah. I can remember doing school-based counseling. I can remember working with adjudicated juveniles.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we talk about Black boys being labeled because of their anger, so we criminalize anger in Black boys, right? And so Dr. Simmons, one of the most effective things for me in working with young Black boys was giving them permission to feel.
Absolutely. Absolutely, sir. Because, like we said earlier, they're guarded, and the students that I worked with, they came from tough neighborhoods. Sometimes I would have the biggest football players. These are seniors and they're dwarfing. I'm dwarfed by them. But they'll come to my room during my planning when they knew that no one was there, or after school, and they would just sit. I would always have cushions on the floor and have a pantry, and I would take out the skillet and make a meal. And we would just talk sometimes. So sometimes they just wanted to sit and they would just say, I just wish people would just let me be me. I'm not angry. I'm not this. I'm not aggressive. I do this for football, but this is not who I am. And so we want people to be what we need them to be. And that is just wrong culturally, inter and intra-culturally, because it robs people of the essence of who and how they are. And that's what my research and that's what my work currently does. It helps people to identify and embrace who and how they are. And then in case of couples, if you have a couple and one in that couple doesn't embrace the other for who and how they are, my recommendation is, hey, maybe you shouldn't be with this person. Then you would get, like now, the comment section might go wild because people are, oh, how dare you try to break things up? So then my rebuttal always is, how dare you try to rob them of being themselves? Because that's what it comes down to. And it's morally wounding, it's morally wrong, but the emotional damage that is done is why we have such a large population of African American males who resort to negative societal behavior, which cause them to end up in prison, because they are battling with just wanting to feel like they truly want to feel. But culturally, we don't allow that.
Right. Right. Yeah. Uh, and this that's one of my areas of passion and focus with that. So you and I have we've started to have some conversations about research that we're both interested in, particularly for me with African American males, and with me, I shared with you my research project, was looking at the effectiveness of group therapy to help reduce recidivism among adjudicated Black teens. And so, just as far as research, and we have another question I'm going to get to. So those of you that are tuning in, if you have any questions as we're getting ready to wrap up, any questions or comment, you can put those in the comment section and we will address your questions. But so Dr. Simmons, how might future research on emotions and achievement influence educational or professional practices? And when you answer this question, if you will, think in terms of culture.
Okay. In terms of, I'm sorry, culture?
Yes.
Yes. Real simple. It comes down to identifying the population that you're working with. And when I say identify, I mean from the emotions point of view. Most people that are doing research on emotions are not even labeling emotions accurately. For instance, even the two movies that Disney put out, Inside Out, they label anxiety and joy. Those are discrete emotions in the research, but they said depression, embarrassment. Those are not emotions. Those are combinations of emotions. Those are actually syndromes, manifestations. So future research needs to, first of all, start by identifying the emotions and then looking at for instance, in the case of culture, let's look at your research. So you're interested in research on recidivism rate. So let's say we had a research question: can emotions be used to predict whether or not a previously incarcerated person might reoffend? So what do? We first of all give them an emotional assessment. We're looking at their emotional profiles. We're then looking at how many times they were actually in prison. Then you run the nerdy statistics to say, can this be used as a predictor for this outcome? If we can do that, let's say before a person leaves prison, then we will at least have a predictor, an indicator as to whether or not this person is likely to offend. And we can do what? Put programs in place to supersede that. In the case of education, if we gave an emotional profile, if we assess the emotional profile of our students on day one, like I did, and before I retired, I remember the year before I retired, I assessed 1,000 students, every science student in that school that I was in, and gave every teacher an individual profile and a group profile. That year, the science department had the lowest amount of student referrals in the history of that school. So that's another way that future research can look at this. What is the effect of assessing emotions versus student referrals, etc.? In professional practice, I've had several instances where I was commissioned to look at how emotions can be used to as a predictor, or in retrospect. For instance, I had it was a medical group that I talked about earlier. They hired me to look at whether or not emotions could be used to help them to understand their customer satisfaction surveys from their HIPAA scores. And so from that point of view, they were clearly able to see individual by individual who was adding positively to customer service and who was not adding positively to customer service. So imagine if we did these kinds of research, and these don't have to be large research projects, because a lot of existing research is in place. Case in point, my own. Case in point, the research group led by Reinhard Peckrun in Germany, of whom I piggybacked my research off of. So there are very small groups of people who are doing achievement emotions research, and we have lots of things that are already in place that future research can piggyback off of. So those were three examples of educational and professional practices, as well as the personal practices that I mentioned earlier, where we can use research to help to better understand emotions and how they will impact our achievement rates.
Right. So that's, that's what intrigued me about your research and being introduced to your research, is that, a lot of, and I think this is where a lot of times school districts don't get right. We have a high number of referrals to the office.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Then they get in the school to prison pipeline, right?
You go.
So we're talking about behaviors,
Mm-hmm.
but not understanding the emotion that is influencing the behavior. And I think
Exactly.
if we shift that focus, uh, we may have some success in reducing all of these referrals and improving classroom behavior.
Absolutely. Absolutely. See, the thing is, and then there might be educators who say, well, we're already doing that. What they're doing 9 times out of 10, and you and I talked about this even with your clients. So we have what we call personality profiles. Well, I look at these personality profiles as a bowl of salad. But what are the ingredients in that salad? Because you and I can have the same personality profile, but our emotional profile will be different. So why not, before we make that bowl of salad, i.e., give that personality test, why not do the individual emotions profiles so we know what's going into that salad? And then the other thing, we can't give everybody the same bowl of salad. Some of us don't like onions in our salad.
Right. 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 Yeah. Because, you know, in, my research project and looking at what I've been interested in is because behaviors and actions are influenced by something. And it's normally by my actions are normally influenced by what I'm thinking or by what I'm feeling.
Exactly.
And so
Very
again, I
well
think
put.
that's what we're, yeah.
Yes.
So some comments, Angie, how do you encourage young people, boys and girls, to share their feelings and not suppress those emotions? So how do we get them to talk about what they're feeling on the inside?
First of all, young people are very intuitive. You cannot fool them. You have to be completely transparent. The average adult is not true to themselves when they're trying to get young people to open up to them. I started every school year with Unit Zero. For the first week of school, I did no academic work. The first day, they got the emotions profile. The second day, they got their results. Then every day for the first 5 days, whether school started on Monday or Wednesday, the first 5 days was all about your emotions and understanding those emotions individually and then as a group. Then the second week of school, we can talk about Unit 1. Now, I took a lot of slack from administrators who didn't understand the need for that. They'll say, oh, we have our SEL program. Again, your SEL program is saying Dick and Dora is running. If Dora falls down, how should Dick feel? Well, he's going to say, well, I don't know. I don't care because I'm going to just keep running. That's what inner city kids would say. So in order to be successful, we've got to be real from day one. We've got to let students know that we want to truly know who and how they are, because no amount of handouts and paperwork is going to get a student to open up to you if you are not being real.
And, to piggyback off of that is, so what's been effective for me working in schools, juvenile correction facilities and places is, again, allowing young people to feel what they feel, letting them know that it is okay what you're feeling in this moment. If you're angry, it's okay. Let's talk about it. So allowing them to feel what they feel in that moment, and validating their feelings.
Yes. That's crucial.
I hear,
validation part.
Yeah, right, yeah. So validate. So for grown-ups, sometimes where we make the mistake is that we feel like validating means that we agree.
Exactly. Right. The word validation comes from value. Right. What value are you placing on what this child is feeling? But again, not to cut you off, I'm sorry, it comes to the internalization of the concepts. One of the things I had to do as an educator was train teachers on how to write lesson plans with internalization. And 90% of the teachers struggle with that because they didn't see themselves emotionally invested in the lesson. So if you don't see yourself emotionally invested in this lesson, you're not going to deliver it effectively. The students are going to see that you are a phony and they're not going to pay attention. It's the same way with their feelings. And everybody is spending money on SEL programs when the only SEL program we need is what you just said, validation.
Right. The next comment from Pam, it says, as a school counselor, how do I lead my students into this to resolve conflicts? Also, where can I get the emotional assessment for middle schoolers?
Okay, so to answer the second question first, since that's easy, you contact me and we can set up how to get your students assessed. The first part of the question, I got so excited. Repeat the first part of the question for me again, please, Dr. Thriving.
As a school counselor, how do I lead my students into this to resolve conflict?
Yes, that's why I started with the second part first. You have to give them a reason, a value. The research that my research is based on is called the control value theory of achievement emotions. And I interpreted that to my students as meaning control what you value, value what you control. And basically, this is what I was talking about with internalization. So as a counselor, you have to give them a reason to value it, because students see counseling as punitive because they don't feel as though the quote unquote counselor really cares. I've had that from students over and over. And even if the counselor is the most caring person in the world, the antecedent to their behavior is based on the fact that in their world, they have very few people that they can trust. So the first thing you have to do is build trust. Then, in building the trust, you then say, I would like to know more about you. We are going to take an assessment because I feel as though you can tell me truly what you are feeling. There is no right or wrong. After we get the results, we'll talk about it. Before they take the assessment, of course, I would have to talk to the counselor or whoever commissions the assessment about how to explain it to them, or depending on location, although virtually it's easy to do it, explain to students exactly what it is we'll be measuring and why, and letting them know, full stop, over and over, I repeat, this is for me to get to understand what you are feeling, because I value what you're feeling. What you're feeling is important to me. I remember trying to train a group of counselors this way, and they point blank sadly told me, anybody got time for this? I got too much paperwork. So I commend the counselor for asking that question, because that's the kind of inquisitiveness that gives me hope that our students are in good hands.
Right. And so for a school district, for a counselor that may utilize your assessment, have the assessment completed, the profiles completed, how does one implement the results of that profile?
Oh, that's the easiest question all night. The only thing you need to know in order to implement the results are the meanings of these words: joy, hope, pride, anger, anxiety, hopelessness, boredom, shame. And as Dr. Thriving will attest, each profile has a full explanation as to how to understand the words. And then when I work with groups, I also include training. So you won't just get the results and they're thrown to you. I also, wherever possible, come into classrooms and co-teach and model the behavior. Model the behavior also in intervention programs. I've done this in juvenile halls as well as in the regular school setting, so that the adults are comfortable with seeing how it is done. But the number one area for success is true buy-in. Unfortunately, in education, educators over the years, they have this saying, oh, this week we're Marzanoing, and next week we're Maslowing, and the other week we're whatever. And so they get used to every program as being transient. And one of the things that students buy into is the lack of consistency. So the best way to implement the program is first the willingness to be consistent. Then I come in with the support to get the program going.
Okay. Right. So, Dr. Simmons, again, thank you for being a guest tonight on Thrive Talks. I have enjoyed your insight, your expertise. I look forward to us working together in the future, collaborating on some things. Again, I am appreciative of your research, and I see the value in your research. As you know, that's why I reached out to you to consult with you with a couple that I was working with, because I see the value how I can use your research even to help couples that I'm working with in marriage counseling and couples counseling, uh, with that emotional component. Because with couples, there's normally they develop a negative communication cycle, and there's a breakdown in communication because of that emotional component, right? And so that's where I see the value of your research with me working with couples again. So I appreciate that, and I look forward to collaborating with you in the future and doing some work with you in the future. So uh, I'm going to give you the final words. Please, and let the audience know how that they can contact you and where you're located.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much, Dr. Thriving, for this opportunity. Thank you for validating my work because I truly find that that is the highest form of compliment. As far as me, I'm virtually, I'm global. If there's a plane ticket involved and it's worth my while to travel, however, I am available virtually, and thankfully, we now live in a virtual world. My website is drmarilynsimmons.com, and I think you have that on the screen. Additionally,
Mhm.
I am on all of the social media sites, including contact information, and I'm on all social media sites as Dr. Marilyn Simmons. I look forward to people reaching out and helping wherever we can to turn around the stigma associated with emotions and mental health.
All right. So again, thank you, Dr. Simmons. Thank you for the listening audience. Tune in to our next show. We are going to have a panel of Black male therapists on the next show, and we're going to be talking about Black men and mental health. Looking forward to that episode, and other Black male therapists joining me to share their expertise and their thoughts related to Black men and mental health. Again, thank you everyone for tuning in, and to remember, whatever you do, keep thriving. Have a good night, everyone.
Thriving. Yes. Thank you. Good night.